Welcome back to Nova Projects. Today we're back on the Nova. We're going to be getting the front and rear brakes squared away. We're going to start off with the front brakes now. Now if you remember, this has spindles from, I think it's Classic Performance Industries or something like that, that adapt it to a Corvette hub. And I think this is also a 1-inch drop spindle. Now, because of that, we're going to need Corvette brakes. Now, we could have gone with just any, I think it's C4 through C6 brakes, but the owner of this car wanted high-performance brakes, so we went with a Willwood kit. The front should be a really easy install, so let's get going on it. Alright, so here's the brake kit we got from Summit. I'll link everything that I'm using down below, got the instructions. Here's our calipers. They're 4 pistons. Man, they're big. Definitely a high-performance brake. Ooh, this thing is big. It's hard to fit in shot. So this should be pretty cool. I'll just thumb through here real quick. Should be a really simple install. Yep, alright, cool. Here's the part number. I'll also have it linked down below, like I said earlier. Okay, get the rotor slid on here. Okay, next we need to get the rotor on. Okay, you can see how many washers this kit came with. Kind of crazy. I don't know exactly why, to be honest with you. Maybe these bolts. So I think I'm just going to use one of these silver washers, because there's only 4 of them, so it makes sense that, you know, each caliper bolt gets one. Now they do say to install Loctite. Put Loctite on these bolts, which we will do. I'm just going to get one in place, check the fit on everything. Okay, so with the fit tester, I went ahead and put some Loctite on this bolt. This bolt still needs Loctite. And you know what I just realized? There's actually an arrow on the rotor, and we have it backwards. Probably because these are vented rotors or whatever they're called. They're cooled by the air coming through, and they must have a special design that's directional. So we're going to have to pop the caliper back off. Not a huge deal. Alright, we've got the proper rotor now. So let's get the caliper on. Alright, with those bolts finger tightened, now we're going to torque them. Willwood says to torque them to the factory spec, which is 125 foot-pounds. So that's what we're going to do. These are 21mm bolts. So next we're going to install the brake pads. Take off this rubber band, and there's a washer and a lock nut on this side. Move this little bridge thing. Now before we put the pads on, I am going to just remove the oil from the rotor so we don't contaminate the pads. It wouldn't be a bad idea to put some lugs on here. We have not gotten the new wheels yet, so I don't actually have the lugs either, because these use a different lug nut than the old hubs. Because this is a Corvette hub, it uses metric because it's newer. Here's our pads. Looks like both the front and back are identical, so we don't need to worry about mixing them up. Just test fit this real quick. Goes in no problem. I'm gonna just put a little bit of brake grease on the contact points to prevent any binding or squealing or anything like that. See how much easier they go in with grease. Perfect. And now we're just going to put this thing back in. All this does is keep the brake pads from backing out. Alright, now we're just going to use a 4mm Allen. Need a bigger wrench. Thought it was a 10mm, but it's actually an 11. Kind of weird. How many times am I going to do that? Put your bets in the comments. Doesn't need to be crazy tight. Just tight enough that's not going to back out. Well, that's pretty much installed. Obviously we're going to have to get the brake line in, but I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Then we'll get the brake line squared away. You know what, guys? I'm not super happy with how the rotor is centered between the pads. You see there's very little space on this side, and we have a fair amount of space on this side. So I think these shims are used to move the rotor, not the rotor, the caliper over this way. So we're going to add a few shims over here just so that we can make sure that the caliper's centered up properly. So I'm guessing we're going to need probably 3. Let's start with 3 shims on each bolt. Okay, I just have the bottom one loosened up enough that I can slide these shims in. Now I'm gonna leave the top one a little bit loose so I can get the shims in the lower one. So it looks like on the outer side, this one top piston is extended a little bit more than the lower one. That's not a big deal. It'll self-correct as soon as we apply the brakes. But if I push this against the hub, it's about how much space we have down there. Looks like we need to take a shim out. As you can see now we have the opposite problem. Not a big deal. Okay, let's test that out. You know, I think we could even do with one less shim. Much more even. So we'll try that. I'll torque these back up. Looking good. I'm gonna get the other side done. Here we go, passenger side is on. It also took one shim, but the spacing looks excellent. Alright, so it turns out I just overlooked the fact that the C-clip was not seated properly. That's one thing you gotta make sure. I thought it was, but it was not. So we're gonna need to take those shims out of the caliper mounting bracket. Yeah, so it's looking like I actually even need to take out a couple shims on the caliper bolts. You know, before we do anything, let's throw the little axle separator in there that keeps the C-clips from falling out. That way we know we're solid. Oh, you know what I'm remembering? We gotta pop this cap off, don't we? To get the bolt in. Fun. Alright, now just torque the carrier bearing cap to 80 foot-pounds. Alright, now we're just going to check, make sure all this is good. You know what? We need to, take out shims. Weird. That's looking pretty good. So, we'll torque all that stuff up and call it good on this side. Now we've got the front brakes squared away. We can go ahead and move on to the rears. Now we do have a few finishing up things to do. First things first is, last time, if you remember, the U-bolts I got were a little too wide. So I got these ones that are the proper width, but obviously we're going to need to slot these holes so that the new U-bolts fit. So I think I'm going to go ahead and use a carbide burr on a die grinder, and we'll see how that does. Looks like we only got to do one hole, that's nice. This side should be good. Looks like we gotta cut a hole in the new one. Okay, so I cut a hole in this. I think it's gonna work. Okay, we'll come back and torque everything up to spec once we get the other side done. Alright, we got both sides snugged up, so I think we should be good to go ahead and start putting the brakes on. Well, first we got to get the axles in, but then we can do the brakes. Okay, so now we've got to press in our wheel studs. I've got a shop press, so it makes it kind of easy for me, but if you ever find yourself installing wheel studs without a shop press, a quick and dirty way of doing it is stacking some washers and using a lug nut and an impact or a big long breaker bar or whatever to suck the stud into the axle. But I'm just going to use this. Alright, there's one of our axles. Alright, now we get to the fun stuff. We got our new Willwood kit here. Let's go ahead and pop it open. Alright, so on the rears it's a little bit more complicated, I guess you could say, than the fronts, because we do have a parking brake that we are putting on. So we need to bolt the backing plate on first. See if those bolts are going to hit the axle. And we're going to play it Loctite, just because these are bolts you definitely don't want coming loose. Okay, now we need to put our axle in. Do need to lube up the seal. It's dry. Shove it in all the way, and then we'll put the C-clip in. You see our axle poking out? I'll just... There we go. Put a C-clip on. It's loose on there. So we'll just pull the axle back out. And there we go. Once we get the other side in, which we didn't quite get it all the way seated, then we'll put the bar that goes between the axles and keeps them from popping in far enough for the C-clip to come out. Alright, now we'll put our rotor on. Looks like we need a register adapter. The kit does come with this, because the rotor doesn't have the same outer diameter as the axle registration's outer diameter. Okay, so the adapter's got kind of a tight fit, so I found it a little bit easier to push it in with the rotor out and put it on. That looks good now. And we got our caliper. Fit and finish looks pretty good. Did come with caliper bolts. Alright, so we've got these bolts with these washers. And then the manual suggests starting out with a couple shims on each, so that's what we'll do. And then just like we did on the front, we just need to make sure the axle's up snug and check for centered, which it is not. It needs to go 1/8 of an inch that way, so we need a few more shims. Okay, so I'm realizing here, part of our issue is there's very little clearance between the rotor and the caliper bracket. That could just be due to these being aftermarket axles, so the axle to flange offset is slightly too little, so we may need to shim the caliper bracket. I'm going to pop off those Allen head bolts that are holding the caliper bracket onto the backing plate. 1/4 inch hex, Allen key, whatever. Okay, let's put some washers behind the caliper bracket and see how that sets it up. Yeah, let's see how that sets us up. Looks like we still need more. I mean, that was only a 1/16 of an inch, so it makes sense. Alright, I'm going to thread these nuts on, which I don't have lug nuts for this car yet because I don't know what wheels we're going to put on. Try to draw the rotor up square against the axle flange. And we're just rubbing. So we need another couple washers at least, probably. Which is unfortunate, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Alright, you can see we've got plenty of clearance now. Could probably even take out a washer, but let's test fit the caliper back on here and see if it fits right with 2 shims, and if it doesn't, we can adjust from there. We may end up taking a washer out. It's pretty close, but I'm just gonna check with calipers real quick. Yeah, it looks like we need one more shim on the caliper mounting bolt. Yep, pretty much dead on. So guys, checking there, just like the fronts, to make sure the rotor is centered in the caliper. A little hard on the camera to see it right, but it's just about centered. Okay, so now that we know everything works right, I need to torque the caliper bracket bolts up, and then I also need to take these out, Loctite them, and then torque them up. Bit tight between the spring perch and the bolt. Oh, one thing I just noticed that I should have noticed earlier, these rotors are directional. You can see the arrow here. This is the direction of rotation. Luckily, I got it correct, so we're good there. Okay, so for the pads, we're going to use a 3/16 X key. That retaining clip, hopefully I wasn't blocking it. You just lift that up, pull back, slides back like that. Really nice system, honestly. Got our brake system grease. We're just going to grease the points where the pistons ride. We're also going to grease the sides where the pads slide. Obviously, you don't want to get any on the braking surface. There's one pad, and there's the other. And we just slide this guy back in. And you can see these little pins go through the holes on the brake pad tabs. And you know what, now that I'm looking at it, turns out the part I'm measuring on does not represent the brake pad surface. And you can see, hopefully, we have a lot more space on this side than we have on that side. So we're going to pop out one of these washers on the caliper mounting bracket bolts and see how that has us sit. So I think that took a little bit too much away. Now we've got too much space on this side, too little over here. So we'll just add in a couple shims on this bolt, because I'd rather shim here than here. We're not really supposed to shim here, not that it's bad or dangerous, it's just, you know, I'd rather shim here. So that's what we're going to do. We'll add a couple shims there and see how that lays. Alright, that looks pretty dang even to me. I'm happy with it. So we'll make sure everything's torqued up, and I think we can call this side just about done on the brake front. Almost forgot to put our retaining bolt in that holds the pads in place. Pad retainer in place, that is. Alright, I'm going to set you guys up and I'll just blast through the other side. Alright, there we go. Both front and rear, left and right brakes are done. Now let's get the shocks in for the rears, and then we should be able to button up the differential. Alright, here's one of our new shocks. We're going to need to jack up the axle housing. This thing's got adjustable shackles on the rear of the springs, so I think we may need to mess with that a little bit. Alright, so it looks like to get our shock anywhere near where it needs to be, we're going to need to adjust our adjustable shackles. The front is dropped a couple inches anyways, so we'll put them at the lowest setting back here and see how it does with the shocks. Alright, so it looks like due to the genius design of this whole setup, we're going to need to drop the gas tank to get that bolt in, since it has to come in through the inboard side of the shackle. There's no other way around it unless I wanted to cut holes, and I don't, so that's what we're gonna do, I guess. Fun times. Alright, so I went ahead and dropped the gas tank, not that bad, just a couple straps. And with that out of the way, I was able to bring the leaf spring all the way up onto these shackles. So hopefully that'll get us at the correct ride height. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. We got all of the brakes installed. You can see we've actually got tires on now. We'll be doing that next time. Next time we're gonna be getting the lines on. We'll get the brake system bled and operational. And we'll probably also be getting the drive shaft measured and installed so that we can get this thing to be a driver. So I'll see you guys then.
When you were in bed asleep,